What is the difference between humble and modest? Both of these words are used to describe someone who isn't too proud or arrogant about his or her achievements. However, there is a subtle difference between these two adjectives that you need to know. Before we explore the meanings, let's look at the subtle grammatical difference between them. Humble can be used as both an adjective and a verb, but modest can only be used as an adjective. This difference means that while humble can describe a person's character or can be used as an action, for example, he humbled himself, strictly describes qualities like behavior, possession, or appearance. What does it mean to be humble? A person who is described as humble in English is someone who has a genuine and unpretentious view of themselves. Usually this person recognizes their strengths and achievements but don't see themselves as superior to others. It's all about being down to earth and open to learning even after they've done great things. For example, a world-famous scientist who acknowledges their team's contributions instead of taking all the credit is humble. Key traits of a humble person. This is someone who recognizes their flaws and mistakes, gives credit to others for their success, is open to learning, and respects people in all levels. Now let's see this word in context.
I need to go humble myself before that slut Frelania and see how she managed such a miracle.
I say cautiously, because in my humble opinion,
I'd be humble after I got fired.
Leaving my humble self, my beloved wife, and my beautiful daughter.
My husband is a humble man.
What does it mean to be modest? Someone who is described as a modest person is one who avoids showing off or drawing attention to themselves. This could be about their accomplishments, their appearance, or their possession. Modesty is about how someone presents themselves to the world, how they downplay their success or avoid openly bragging about it. For example, a millionaire who drives an average car and avoids discussing their wealth is being modest. The key traits of being a modest person is someone who downplays their achievements and success, avoids attention-seeking behavior, dress or act conservatively, and keeps a balanced, reserved demeanor. Word in context.
Charlotte is being modest.
Don't be modest.
I think it's very nice, very modest, and it does cover up a lot of cleavage.
I want to buy something sort of simple and modest and elegant is what's called for.
Oh, Juanita, don't be modest.
You're modest and retiring.
Humble versus modest. Which one should you use in which situation? The first situation where you might use these two words is when talking about achievements. You should use humble when someone acknowledges their success but doesn't act better than others. For example, even after becoming a millionaire, he stayed humble and treated everyone with respect. When you use modest in this situation is when someone doesn't like talking about their own success or avoids attention. For example, she's very modest about her singing talent and never brags about it. Quick tip. A humble person knows they're successful but stays down to earth, while a modest person doesn't like to talk about their success too much. The next situation when you would use these two adjectives is when talking about personality. You would use humble for someone who is very kind, respectful, and doesn't think they're more important than others. For example, the professor is very humble. He always listens to his students and never acts like he knows everything. On the other hand, we use modest for someone who is quiet, shy, and prefers not to stand out. For example, she is a modest person who doesn't like being the center of attention. Quick tip to remember it. A humble person respects others and doesn't act superior. A modest person is someone who is quiet and doesn't want to be noticed too much. The next situation is talking about lifestyle and money. We use humble when someone chooses to live a simple life, even if they have a lot of money. For example, even though he's rich, he lives in a small house and has a humble lifestyle. On the other hand, we use modest when talking about something small or not too fancy. For example, they live on a modest budget and don't spend too much on luxury items. Quick tip: a humble person chooses to live simply because they don't care about showing off. Modest is something small, simple, and not fancy. This could be a house, salary, or clothes, which moves perfectly into the next situation you would use these two words when talking about clothing. We use modest when talking about clothes that are simple and not revealing. For example, she wore a modest dress that covered her shoulders and knees. However, we don't use humble to describe clothing. So, modest clothes equals not too short, flashy, or fancy, but we don't use humble when describing clothing. Fine. And the next situation you would use these two words is talking about behavior in social situations. We would use humble when someone respects others and doesn't act like they're important. For example, he's very humble and always listens to other people's ideas. We use modest when someone doesn't like attention or prefers to stay quiet. For example, she was modest at the party and didn't talk about herself too much. So, a person who is humble respects others and doesn't act better than them. A modest person avoids attention and prefers to be quiet. A complete breakdown on the difference between modest and humble. Again, please don't forget to get my free ebook, link in the description and first pinned comment, where you're going to get my 7 top tips to becoming a fluent English speaker this year. Now, at this point in the video, I've taught you the difference between modest and humble. So if you're ready to learn some more English words, what I want you to do is to check out this playlist here, where I have so many free lessons teaching you all sorts of words in English. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye!